So our next talk is a panel discussion, so we're excited to have this because it bridges healthcare, craft, therapy, and all the ways that making things can make you happier and healthier as a person. So our moderator for this is Anna Helgeson. Anna is an artist and craft enthusiast who enjoys supporting healthy craft ecosystems in her role at the Center for Craft. As an educator, she engages students in a wide variety of subjects, including craft history and theory, photography, and performance art. She's written about craft for various publications, including most recently the Journal for Modern Craft, and she is motivated by the radical potential of craft to shift the ways we interact with each other, imagine our past, and build the future. The panelists are going to be composed of Tyler Deal. Tyler Deal is the owner of Blue Ridge Expressive Arts, an integrated care practice in her hometown of Boone, which fosters the mind-body connection for individuals coping with medical trauma, chronic and terminal illness, traumatic birth, miscarriage, grief, and loss. She revises traditions of communing through craft in a space that allows individuals to process feelings of marginalization within healthcare experiences through art making. From these experiences, participants craft a new narrative within Appalachia. Tyler's personal artwork is about material foreplay. She has an interest in exploring the dialogue between the delicate and the rigid, the malleable and the static. The harmony between processes achieves a quiet tension representative of her experiences as an artist and expressive arts therapist. We're also joined by Luis Alvaro Sahagun Nuno. Luis was born in Guadalajara, Jalisco, Mexico, and now lives in Asheville, North Carolina. Luis is an artist, an artist and ritualist whose practice confronts the palpable escapability of race and transforms art into an act of cultural and spiritual reclamation. He has exhibited widely at venues including the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, Latchkey Gallery in New York City, Charlie James Gallery in Los Angeles, and the National Museum of Mexican Art in Chicago, among others. He's held residencies in Roswell, New Mexico, the Sally and Don Lucas Artist Residency Program in Saratoga, California, the Chicago Artists Coalition, and was a critical race studies scholar at Michigan State University. His work has been examined in publications including Artillery Magazine, Art Forum, the LA Times, News City, and the Chicago Tribune. His work is included in the Fidelity Collection of Boston, Alta Med Collection of Los Angeles, the Alex Coe Collection, and the Beth Rudin DeWoody Collection, among many others. His practice has been spotlighted as having a unique voice, helping to shape, shift, and touch the world of radio, podcasts, and television networks such as Mundo, Fox, NBC, Univision, and WBEZ NPR. He received his undergraduate degree from Southern Illinois University Carbondale, an MFA at Northern Illinois University, and Luis is a 3 Art awardee and 2023 United States Artist Fellow. Also joining the panel is Ameena Batada. Ameena is a health and wellness professor and co-director of the UNC Asheville, is it Gillings or Gillings? Gillings. Master of Public Health program in place-based health located in Asheville. She works with community organizations to conduct social research for program support and policy advocacy. Ameena is particularly interested in the interconnections between craft, community, and nature with health and well-being. She teaches courses in community health, health communication, advancing health equity, and research methods, among other courses. Ameena is the daughter of South Asian Indian immigrants to Canada, and she currently lives in Asheville after having lived in mid-Atlantic U.S. cities and New Delhi, India, and having studied maternal and child health, international health, population and family health, and health communication at UNC Chapel Hill and Johns Hopkins School for Public Health. And lastly on the panel, but not leastly, is Kirsten Neely. Kirsten Neely is a second-year student at the joint UNC Chapel Hill, Gillings UNC Asheville Master of Public Health program.
There you go. There's a mouthful.
And graduate of the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. She currently works in residential life and has an interest in how the spaces we live in can influence our health, well-being, and sense of community. Kirsten is committed to health equity and community-centered action and is looking forward to a career built on service and community engagement. So could you all join me in giving a big round of applause to this moderator and wonderful panel.
Thank you.
If you want to use the stand there, there's an extra microphone too. And
how do I?
put the clicker there.
Oh, you stole the clicker.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for having us here, and thanks to the Southern Highland Craft Guild. So I was going to start with introductions, but wow, I feel like that was very thorough. We are not, you can see there's only 4 of us here. We're not actually joined today by Tyler Deal. She had a family emergency, so she's not with us today. But the rest of us are super excited to be here and really excited to have a conversation about craft and community vitality. So I'm just curious, like, who among you are makers, would consider yourself a maker of some sort? Awesome, I thought so. Cool, okay, good. So it'll be no surprise to you that maybe there are some connections between well-being and craft, right? Might be some connections between health, wellness, and craft. And so I'm Anna, I work at the Center for Craft. We partnered with the Gilliam School of Public Health to pilot this program that could develop a exploratory study that would explore just these things. What in particular are the connections between craft and well-being? So for those of you not familiar with the Center for Craft, we are a nonprofit based in Asheville, but work nationally. And our mission really is to resource, catalyze, and amplify how and why craft matters. So we advance access to understanding of craft through national grant making in support of makers, teaching artists, and researchers, as well as through free public gallery located in downtown Asheville. I mean, I don't know if you want to, these are your words, kind of explaining the goals of this collaboration.
Sure. Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Ameena, and I'm at UNC Asheville and work with that long-named public health program. I won't say it. It'll take another 5 minutes. And I've had the opportunity to work with the Center for Craft for a few years, and about a year ago, one of our colleagues, Marilyn Zeff, and I were talking about how do we better understand and maybe share the health impacts, as Anna mentioned, of craft. So not this idea that does craft and crafting influence health and well-being, but really what could we learn about the people who are supported through the Center for Craft's work. What are they doing, and how is it contributing to health and wellness? And from my perspective as a public health professional, how can we demonstrate to public health folks that craft and crafting is an integral part of well-being, and that it should be part of our public health efforts? So we did do a literature review. All good researchers will do that, or I don't know, good is the right word, but many will do it. And then that kind of led us to this grants program that Anna will talk about, but really trying to figure out what are the ways that craft and crafting are contributing to health and wellness, and can we measure it? If we can, how do we measure it? And who cares if we measure it? How do we share that information? So that's kind of what launched us into this idea. And then, shall I go ahead and just say what the goals are?
Oh, sure. I just have this, yeah.
Yeah, so we partnered, but really the goals were to do an exploratory pilot. So really to just understand what these artists, craft artists, were doing and how that was contributing to health and well-being from their perspectives. It was 2 months partnership with 6 students. Kirsten will talk about that more. And it was our hope that we would maybe think about what are the ways that this is happening. Could we create a framework for it? Because that's really popular in public health, to have a pathway model or a framework. And could we highlight the impact the craft artists were having on health and well-being and community by telling the stories of their work, not by necessarily in that short time measuring, but that will lead us to potentially measuring.
Yeah, so at the Center for Craft, our bit here was to develop a grant program so that we could engage artists or art collectives or arts organizations in this research. So last fall, we put out a grant for artists to receive $2,200 to engage in this and be partnered with a student from Ameena's class. So pictured here are 5 of the 6 artists, and I'm just going to talk briefly about their projects. We got wonderful applications. Every time we run a grant program, I'm really blown away and inspired by the creativity and artwork in our region. And so we selected, I'm just going to stand up because it makes me better. So we chose 6 outstanding projects from the group of applicants. So first here we have Jekalai Swimmer. And Jekalai is an enrolled member of the Eastern Band of Cherokee and is a graphic designer and cartoonist. And so his proposal was to create these risograph prints and zines that would depict sayings in Cherokee language. So he's very passionate about native speakers and retaining Cherokee language. And so he created these signs and posted them around Kuala Boundary so that people could have these encounters with Cherokee language in a fun, humorous way. Next, we had Elizabeth Ivy, and Elizabeth is an Asheville-based artist, and her work, she has a program called Sister Soul Sessions, in which she works with BIPOC girls and women to do craft projects together. Her work is, you can see up here, she does these beautiful collages with textiles. So she creates sort of these narrative images out of fabric. And then Andy Gelstrup is from Boone, North Carolina. Oh, and an important element of this particular grant, we also worked specifically with Western North Carolina makers, so it was very place-based, very regional focus. So Andy here is from Boone, and she proposed to make a community-made labyrinth. So what you're looking at are strips of fabric that she convened community members to rip together and then created a public installation in Boone, this incredible meditative labyrinth space that folks could walk through and engage with. Next, we had Cowie School Art and Heritage Center, who is directed by Laura Brooks. And so this is, has anyone been there to the Cowie School? Cool.
I'm part of this.
Oh, great, of course you are, yes. Yeah, so this was a school building, and now it's occupied by artists and art organizations, and I think there's also a yoga studio and co-working space. So it's this really active, creative space. And they proposed to have a series of community days where artists would open their studios and folks could learn some skills, do some artwork with them free of charge. And then we had Tyler Deal, who's also from the Boone area, and she's the owner of Blue Ridge Expressive Arts, and she focuses primarily on individuals going through traumatic birthing events, and so she wanted to create 2 craft arts support groups that would meet a couple times a week and do projects in bookbinding as a form of narrative medicine. And this is some of her work here. She's also an artist. And then Luis, I will let Luis talk about his own project himself, because we're lucky enough to have him here.
Hello. So my project, well, in my own practice, I've been working on thinking about how to interweave contemporary art, traditional craft, with curanderismo, which is a healing modality, traditional healing modality that was born out of the immense healing that was happening through colonization. And so for the workshop that I did, it was an intimate workshop where we created a miniature sculpture that we created with beeswax and resin and clay that also functioned as a spiritual cleansing kit that you could take home with you. And then we concluded our time together with a ceremony honoring our medicine wheel and our time together.
Yeah, very cool. So you may all be wondering, like, what does research look like in this context, right? Like, how was the research done? And so I thought Ameena and Kirsten could talk a little bit about that.
Thanks. Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, this exploratory, so it was a start, and something that I have learned over the years is that I think one of the better ways to start research is with a different R word, and that's relationship, and to be in relationship with people before you start researching them. And so really, given the timeline, our main goal was to be in relationship with the makers, in terms of us setting a foundation for continued work together with the craft artists who would choose to do that. So you could call it qualitative research, right? You could call it a sort of participant observation. Each of the 6 students connected. They learned about the artists, and then they asked if they could be connected with particular artists. And we were really fortunate that everyone was matched with the person that they had asked about, except for one case where it was the student actually had 2 people they were thinking would be great to be with. So that was really important. And then they contacted the artists and spent time with the artists, either in person or virtual. We worked ourselves in class. It was a community health transformation class. So we were already learning how are groups of people, community members, transforming their communities in terms of health. So it fit really well in that course and context. And so the idea was, let's learn about all these different ways we measure community health, and then let's put them aside, and then let's come back and talk to artists and find out what the artists are doing and hear from them. But we had in our, kind of in the back of our minds, ways that we knew in public health that community health was measured, like measures of the incidence or prevalence of health conditions, quality of life, life expectancy, sort of those very, sort of one might think concrete, but really those measures that are used to motivate and push programming or resource allocation. So then I will maybe turn it to Kirsten to talk about kind of what happened, because I then was like, okay, students, go do your thing. And so maybe, and these 2 were matched. So that is kind of neat. Would you talk a little about what you did, how you, engaged in that research or process?
Yeah, so I knew I wanted to be matched with Luis. I really appreciated his craft, and so I had reached out to him, and we found a time to meet at UNC-A so that I could just kind of pick his brain a little to better understand his journey to doing his work and kind of what went into it. And then through that, so after the interviews, right after meeting our craftspeople, we then sat down and built narratives, so created narratives that I think we'll discuss the report, but that went into a report ultimately. So I think to Ameena's point, it was about building relationships, and that could happen different ways, but for my work with Louise, it was through that initial interview, and then just kind of touching base again if I had questions, like, Louise, what did that mean? So thankfully he was nice enough to continue responding to me.
Good, thank you. Thanks, yeah. And some of the students were able to go out and see the craft artists doing their work. What you saw, Andy's labyrinth that she created, the student who was matched with her went out. I think there's a picture.
Yeah, you can
of
kind
them.
of see it.
The labyrinth is up in the top, and Isla, who's laughing with Andy up at the top middle, went out and did the labyrinth and had that experience and was able to, I think somebody came by and talked with them informally. So it was very exploratory at this point. And I can talk later about what next steps we're doing that may appeal to some folks' ideas of measurement as well.
Yeah, and so, this was a pilot, right? And an exploratory research project. And what was so interesting to me and really fascinating was I sort of came into this, so my background is craft and art and not research. So I came into this project with a very narrow idea of what research was. And so it was so eye-opening and exciting to work with Ameena and the class to sort of open my mind about what research really is. And Ameena also was really specific about some of the baggage that comes along with research, right? Some of the colonial baggage that comes along with research that has been damaging. And so thinking about how can research be done and be done that is useful, that can also not do harm, right? That can start with relationship building. And so this drawing I really love. This is a drawing that Ameena actually did that gave a visual of some of the ways that craft and well-being are connected. And so I always had this kind of drawing in the back of my mind, thinking about, okay, what can research be? Research is about collecting stories. It's about building relationships, and then thinking about how that information can maybe be translated into very different forms to speak to different audiences. That's what I was really thinking about with this program, too, is like, at the Center for Craft, we really think a lot about how and why craft matters. And in order to communicate that, we really need to be able to communicate that to a number of different people in a number of different ways. And also, craft matters for a variety of reasons, right? And so one of those reasons is because it's good for our health. I'm going to say it. So this drawing was sort of floating around in the background of the research. And then this maybe looks a little bit more like the results of research you might expect. I'm going to let Ameena talk about it because it's a complicated but very fascinating framework of what they came up with as a result of this study.
Thanks. Yeah, so both of them, like, this just gives you insight into like maybe my mind because it can be very like I think creative in two different ways, but certainly visually maybe appealing, and then you get to this and you're like, whoa, there's a lot on that slide. And I think this speaks to the public health realm, right? So like I mentioned earlier, how might we think about a framework or a pathway? And this is neither is to really capture how craft in its exhaustive ways contributes to health and well-being. We couldn't do that here. We worked with 6 artists, right? So what this shows, and you can kind of read it looking at the big screen. First, it shows contexts, right? So contexts matter. Where we live, where all these artists, all the craft artists were from Western North Carolina or doing work in Western North Carolina right now. And there are things happening in our community and politically and socially constantly that are influencing how this work happens and how the work leads to certain outcomes. And so if you orient yourself to the left, that starts with the craft artists. And that was interesting to me. So this is built on the students. The students pulled out their own pathways. They designed their own pathways and then contributed to a larger collective pathway. And typically, we could just talk about craft being the starting point. But here it was really in large part about the makers, the people themselves, and in particular their identity, their art form, and their training, each of them. And that then was kind of interacted with or led to processes that they all engaged in with community. And those processes were either making with community members or providing opportunities for community members to experience. And in that process, community members engaged in these different sub-processes, creating, gathering, honoring their experiences. So some were individual level embodied work, some were internalized emotional work, and some of them were social work, right? Doing things together. And since you all are makers, almost all of you, I think, you know this, right? This is what people do. This is maybe in part why you do what you do, is for these ways to engage with the broader community, at least in part. And then those were kind of processed based on people's personal attributes as well, of course, leading to these individual level outcomes related to well-being that were mentioned across the craft artists. So either 2 or more craft artists talking about these. And I won't read the whole list, but everything from physical changes that people notice all the way to senses of belonging, right? And reclamation of identity, of space, whatever it is. And those then were related to more community level outcomes related to well-being. And a lot of cultural community level, but also thinking about health in particular was also, I think, specified. Cross-cutting themes that came up across the bottom were home, place, remembering, relationship, and resilience. And the last note I'll make about this, and I hope we'll have some conversation about some of these aspects, is that what we did learn from the craft artists is that there's challenge and harm that happens even within this process. So it's not to be like, oh, crafting's just good for your health. It is, and crafting also provides that challenge. I think we just in this most recent presentation, I was hearing that, right? Like you get into a place where you have to challenge yourself, whether it's physically or emotionally, and that's important for the better outcomes later. And that sometimes, if craft is in our lives, we mitigate harm as well that is created from outside. Whether it's a social trauma or a physical trauma, that harm can be mitigated, including if it's in a community setting. So I think that was something we learned that was really important to this particular project. And the quote that one of the students had here, in this framework, community crafting feels like a public health intervention or response to a culture of individualism and consumerism. And I just laugh because I think you probably all already think some of that. And for public health students, that's pretty revelatory, I think, too. I mean, for us in public health, I shouldn't just say students. Yeah. So that's what the framework kind of brought up. But I want to pass it to anybody who wants to talk more. Or shall we keep going? Okay.
So I would love to get questions from the audience or hear from you two if you want to talk more about sort of your process together or what you learned. I was really interested by both how this experience may have shifted, Kirsten, your perception of craft, and Louise, maybe your perception of public health. I think that was really, I love this sort of cross-pollination potential of projects like this. So maybe to speak to that a bit.
Do you want to, or should I?
Go ahead.
Okay. I think for me, this project really opened my eyes to the ways that craft may act as a sort of ritual, or the creation of something can be a ritual. And thinking through, right, like people is holistic, and so holistic health, and so seeing craft come into that. Because that's not something that I had heavily considered in the past, and so I do think that this work did shift my perspective in recognizing that craft can be an integral part of public health, and maybe should be an integral part of public health in the work that we do.
That was great, thank you. Yeah, something that where my mind goes to is the work of like holistic, and even this quote, which is intervention or response to a culture of individualism and consumerism. And one of the things that I love about this program, but also, as all of us makers here, it's like thinking about, oftentimes in this, Eurocentric worldview that this country, is functioning in, we often really forget about what it means to introduce spirit, or actually don't introduce spirit at all. So when we think about illnesses, when we think about like what's going on in our lives, it's always about our mind, and it's always about our body, and the spirit doesn't get incorporated. But as a maker, as someone who uses craft, who's using healing, like it just makes me think of like, the power in healing, I think happens because it gets co-created. Co-created with the person in front of you, who you're talking to while you're making, and your community. And oftentimes, a lot of illnesses, whether they're spiritual or physical, they actually start manifesting because emotions and suffering, and they start manifesting into our mind and into our bodies. And so art and craft and making is a beautiful way to us to slow down, to enter a meditative state where we can connect with ourselves and with our spirit, right? Whether we tap into a flow. For me, like when you get lost in making and creating something, where you feel like, I don't know if maybe it happens to you, right? When you're creating that, you don't even know what happened, and now you finish something, or like you had this creation. For me, it's like tapping into spirit, something that's greater than us, right? My studio is a place to create, but it's also a place to destroy and rebuild, right? And that's connection as well with our bodies and who we are, and continue to grow. So I was really excited to be part of this program, to really think about, how can we create or help establish studies and language so that, really in my viewpoint, I think that, in some ways, it's the concept of preaching to the choir, like we know the power of it, but oftentimes a lot of communities, and especially those from underserved communities, like we have to rely on grants, or we're relying on institutions, or finding ways for like our education, is continually losing art and craft in the classrooms, and it just feels like this isn't being valued. So I got really excited to be like, okay, this is going to be tangible. We're going to work towards tangible evidence, study-based, to get this language out and these studies out. So hopefully it could help an increased impact into the communities, right? And it started here in Asheville and in this region, and it could hopefully continue to grow at a more national level.
Yeah.
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 I love this research so much because it speaks to my lifestyle. But my question is, what language can an artist use to describe their work in spirit and making and creating that will allow social, public health officials, people outside of the art world, what language can they use so that those people outside the art world know that they're doing this kind of work? How should we label ourselves and our work?
Yeah, I love that question, in part because that's exactly what we're trying to do, we hope to develop a toolkit. We have some resources that we're working on, but we would love to develop resources for makers to use for just that purpose, to have a language, to be able to translate their work and what they're doing into other arenas for funding, into arenas for support, right? So yeah, that question is a big part of exactly why we're doing this project. And as Ameena alluded to earlier, it's ongoing, this project, so it hasn't stopped. We're going to keep working on it and have resources through MPS website, through the Center for Crafts website, so artists can go there and say, okay, what kind of language, how can I frame what I'm doing for this particular kind of funding? So it's a great question. I don't know if you all had other answers yet, but
Yeah, I have lots of thoughts on that. I'm just even just listening to you, Louise. I was like, oh my gosh, how do we integrate some of that, the focus on spirituality, like you were saying, and the spirit as part of not just mind and body. But anyway, do I need this? Yeah, sorry. Thank you. And so I work a lot with community organizations that are seeking funding, and it's usually through looking at other examples of what people are doing that's similar to what they're doing, or evaluation work, right? So one of the things that we're trying to do now is work with these craft artists to build out evaluation. Evaluation sounds really cold, but like assessing what the outcomes might be. So your work, what's coming out of it, and public health funders are looking for outcomes, right? So how do you identify what those outcomes are in a way and describe them in a way that's going to resonate with them? And so this literature review that we did, we just finished a resource where you can go and see how other people researched their work, and you can do it very very basically in your own setting if you want to know, like, is this having an impact on someone's perception of whether they feel more calm or whether they feel more inspired, and you can ask that of the people who are doing the work or just coming to see your work, right? You can ask that, and then you can tell funders, yeah, 80% of people responded that they feel more calm when they leave this space, if that's helpful. But a lot of it is the language of outcome without being disingenuous either. I think a lot of people feel like, well, I can't really say it because I don't have the information, but I know it. Well, okay, let's find a middle place. I don't want everybody, and I wouldn't suggest that everybody do lots of research, but is there a smaller place where you can come up with what is needed to show, but not have to be like hire someone to do that work for you, because you wear enough hats. Yeah, and I'm happy to talk to anybody about that piece after or in an email. That's why we're building this, so that we can do more of it. Yeah. Time? No. Okay.
Lots of questions. How do you pick? Jeannie.
So this is making me think about citizen scientist work.
Yeah.
Where people would say, like, I saw this many butterflies, I heard this. Is there a place to do that? People were saying it's like more like anecdotal kind of thing. When we place this helpful information, then become a body of work that people can draw from.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah. So that's what we're working on.
That's a
Definitely.
great idea. Yeah.
Yeah, and so in public health, we talk a lot about community-based participatory research and action, or participatory action research, or action research. That's what we had a really great conversation in class about that. That's where in public health this would be. But I love, and I've heard citizen science come out of the natural sciences more, and I think that's a great way to conceive of it. And crowdsourcing, right? Yeah. So we are starting with this compilation of existing research, and then I don't know if you want to talk about teaching artists and the ideas, but that's still floating around.
Yeah. I think for now, just to say that this research again is just beginning, and so we do have some more projects in the works at the Center for Craft to continue this research and make it public and to get more artists involved and all of that. Yeah, stay tuned.
Thanks. Oh, does everybody? Oh, okay.
I don't know if I have questions.
Okay.
Go ahead. Yes.
I have a question that it kind of bounced off of Kel's question, but on the other side. I want to share one thing. I worked with someone who was at Berea College who was doing interventions with artists and business people, coming up with community-based solutions to community-identified problems, so the applied action versus So what happened in one community was that there was a nursing home that was right next to a very busy intersection, and the seniors living there were fearful of crossing the street, and so a dancing performance group created a site-specific dance performance and invited the community to come, and they danced across that intersection, and it drew attention to the public health needs of that community. So my question is, how can public health and student, and I was kind of curious too about how future public health research in your classrooms will be affected by this project, and how can community health practitioners find artists as experts? How can they incorporate the knowledge that we makers are experts in community and can contribute to positive health outcomes?
Love it. Okay, I guess I need to answer that question. I love that. And I'll say, so one of the students in the class had shared with us an example of what you were saying, how can community health turn to makers and craft artists for their insight and influence. And so the student was working with a statewide program that was looking at, or that was developing a disaster planning kit, right? So what does a family need to have if they're in a natural disaster? And because the student reported that because of this project has learned that there should be activities in that disaster packet that are not just coloring, but also like stitching through the cardboard or whatever craft activities, right? And without that knowledge and expertise of what works and how it should be created to be brought in, which community health professionals often don't necessarily have except from their own personal experience maybe, that is really tangible. I think it was such a great example that the student shared. And that's something we do in public health education more and more, is invite makers and artists to come and talk about what is, what's important when we're doing health work. Also this evaluation and assessment piece too. So what are the more creative ways that people can assess their experiences with public health efforts too, right? So I think there are a lot of great ways, and that's going to be what we build our class around continuously. And then my hope is that now that we've developed relationships, that next fall students will work with some of the same and maybe some additional art craft artists to do the pre-post test or whatever it is. So this is going to change. I mean, I have a long appreciation for craft, so it's always been something I wanted, and like I always thought, why wouldn't it be in public health? But it does take some people. I'm always like, what do they think of me? So because I'm like, I'm not like always. I'm like, how do you feel? They're like, feelings? No, this is you've got to keep your feelings out of it because otherwise it's not objective, and that's a research paradigm we're trying to shift also. Yeah.
Thank you for this panel. I've been so curious about this project since I first read about it for Center for Craft email. So it's wonderful to hear you present. I'm looking at things always more through a historian lens, as well as many other layers. But I guess it seemed like post-World War II, there was so much going on with craft and kind of rehabilitative kind of approaches and that sort of thing. And I'm just curious, like, does your literature review get into those at all? Because I think that's the piece that is like, it feels like we've done some of this in the United States, but then why did we get so far away from it, and how can we get back? I guess those are the things that I'm wondering. And then you mentioned like a resource related to the literature review. Could you just share more about that? Just because I'm so curious about what you all were able to surface and find, and appreciate that work so much.
Yeah, absolutely. So the literature, sorry, the literature review we did not, I think we looked at the last 10 years, so that's partly why we didn't see that, because I was just thinking, wait, why didn't we see? That said, there were definitely articles about people with specific health conditions and how important the crafting is. So we really tried to focus on craft to addressing like motor skill questions. Traumatic brain injury was another one, right? So there were some of those examples. There's some really interesting, like craft your device holder if you have a glucometer, that kind of thing. So there was some of that in there. So that makes me think, oh yeah, we should go back much farther as we are able to, yeah. And the resource, I just have a hard copy with me, but we've posted it online, so I can share that link too. And it's constantly changing. That's the thing. We keep adding to it. So I need to put it in a version that will, like a version that updates on its own. So once I get that up, I can definitely share. But I'm happy to take people's emails and email it out. Yeah.
We're also building out a section on the Center for Craft's website for this project that we call Craft and Community Vitality. So you can go on our website and get access to all of the resources that are generated from the projects. And I love your question also because part of my background is also craft history and theory and teaching classes in that and so forth. And I am really fascinated by that transition, and I think because, as you alluded to, mid-century in the United States, there were lots of craft and wellness programs. Particularly, I mean, a lot were focused on veterans, but there were a lot of other ones as well. And honestly, I think part of the shift in the 80s, 90s was to push craft into economic vitality realms, right? To like really research and understand the economic impact of craft in communities. Great, that's important, that's valuable, but I think that was unfortunately done at the expense of maintaining the significant connections between craft and wellness and well-being and even spirituality. And I think a lot of that is stripped when you're trying to chase higher dollar amounts, especially if you're trying to play in an arena with capital fine art, capital F, capital A, fine art. If you're trying to play in that arena and get access to money there, it's you sort of speak in a certain way, and especially, I think this is becoming less true, but especially in the 80s and 90s, the value of your work would be less if you were attached to wellness programs. If you were trying to help people with their, well, that's just the way it was. It became a very sort of purely intellectual in the way we understand it in colonial methodology. Like that kind of presentation of fine art became what drew money. So I think that's part of the answer, but I really think we need to come on back. You all may have answers.
I'll just share what I'm thinking about. It might sound kind of wild, but maybe just sharing. I really believe that I just keep thinking of how a little bit about the funding question up there, or strategizing. I was thinking about that, and I think what's really, what exciting about the program is working with the makers, that our voices are being heard, because I think this work is really rooted in decoloniality. Because how do we get people empowered to understand and value intuition and to value their spirit? And that's really what we're trying to do. And even like maybe, it might even be ironically, can you hear me? Yeah. It might be a little bit ironic that we're using the scientific method, which is rooted on Eurocentric, concepts, to validify intuition and spirit and making, right? So it's a daunting task. It's really interesting. Yeah. But I think going back to why I think it's exciting is because like the programs like this is really centering our voices, right? Not the voices on the other side of the team that value more rational and mathematics and and scientific ways of being. So it's a big struggle, but that's kind of what I was like. My dots were connecting all over the place. So.
Yeah, I love that. And just to like highlight, like that's so important. Like makers, you all are experts. You are the experts. You should be informing and directing, guiding this kind of work. So I think it's just important to recognize that too, and it doesn't always happen that like. Often when you're writing grants and stuff, artists are expected to be so many things, right? And not recognizing that, no, your work is your artwork. Your expertise is that. You don't have to also be all these other things. So anyway.
With anybody's questions off, we'll have one more question from Robert on the table. But after Robert, we're going to go have some lunch. If you have any questions, I'm sure we have it.
One of the things thinking about the panel and the project is I remember a wonderful statement that I saw at what was then I think the Museum of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, and it was on the wall there for many years. And it said a cycle is a circle moving forward through time, and I think a lot about the circularity of movements, and of course they change over time. And so much of this goes back to thinking in terms of John Dewey and education. What's the purpose of an institution and so forth? And I think that what I'm seeing is, for instance, the engagement of an artist in ritual and performance as a community activity is at the sort of far end of individual artist production, plus the beginning end of community engagement in the arts. And I think that's something that a lot of this is about. It's a question of who gets to be an artist, who gets to be a craftsperson, where do they fit in that society, and it isn't polarities. You know, it's really about the broader circle of how we all fit in this.
Beautiful way to end it.
Yes. That's right. Yay.